We are going to do a deep dive on the WNBA CBA. The CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, is basically the contract that the players negotiate with the owners. There is a players association and representatives from each team that negotiated on behalf of the entire league, and the current CBA is expiring this year. So negotiations are currently underway for the next CBA, and there's a lot of contention right now. We all saw the All-Stars come out wearing warm-up shirts that said "Pay us what you owe us" in reference to the current CBA negotiations. And there's a ton of information flying around, and frankly, a lot of misinformation flying around right now. And so we want to give you guys sort of like the most information we have to the best of sort of like our understanding. So what we're going to focus on today is specifically on salary, even though the CBA involves a lot of other things. It involves maternity benefits, health plans, team travel stipends, things like that. That all goes into the CBA as well. But salary, I think, is definitely the most important thing. And so to keep this episode from being 45 minutes long, we're going to only talk about that. The way the WNBA salary cap works is that each team has a fixed cap of about $1.5 million. So the maximum amount they can play all 12 players combined is 1.5 million. They're not allowed to pay any player under $66,000 a year or more than about $250,000 a year. This max has some like asterisk around it. There's a very specific situations you can use that super max. So you can't have very many players that much, but in theory, you can have someone paid $250,000. So if you're assuming each team uses its entire salary cap, the average WNBA salary is around $128,000. And this got a lot of media attention, especially last year when Caitlin Clark was drafted, because a lot of the rookie salaries sit in the $70,000 range, which is pretty crazy when you're talking about like just how much revenue in particular that rookie class generated for the WNBA. I know a lot of places in the country, $70,000 is enough to live on very comfortably. But like, for example, in San Francisco, where the Valkyries play, $70,000, you actually qualify for a lot of low income housing because of how difficult it is to make ends meet on a $70,000 salary, which is pretty crazy to think about, like professional athletes being in that situation. Year over year, all of these numbers changed 3%. So they were 15% smaller 5 years ago when this was negotiated. And this is regardless of the league's performance. So if the league does way better, they still make about the same. If the league does way worse, they make about the same. And so you can see there's pros and cons to both of, each of those situations. And in total, player salaries represent 9% of the league's total revenue. And this has also been floating around social media a ton the past few weeks, comparing how much revenue WNBA players get versus NBA players. And so we're going to go into that next. So I think it's helpful to compare the WNBA to the NBA's CBA. So as of 25, in the NBA, the salary cap is actually not fixed, it's floating, and it's set to about 45% of the league's total revenue. So that actually amounts to $140 million per team currently, which is crazy. It's 100 times bigger than the WNBA. But what's interesting about the NBA salary percentage is that it floats with the league's revenue. So and that's what this first point goes into. If the league makes more money, the players make more money. If the league makes less money, the players then make less money as well. And it's very important to call out that NBA players have actually received at least 40% of all league revenue in every single CBA ever. So first ever CBA, 1983, the NBA was not profitable. They were actually bleeding money. And the players still negotiated 40% of all revenue. And this is revenue, it's not profit. So I think that also gets misspoken about a lot. People are saying like, oh, I see it stated a lot, the WNBA has zero revenue, and that's not true. The WNBA has zero profit because they spend more money than they gain in revenue, but they have about $200 million in revenue every year.
So if
Mm-hmm.
WNBA players were being paid 40% of 200 million, that'd be what, $80 million divided
Yes.
amongst 13 teams. So the
Yes.
salary cap would be more like 6 million instead of 1.5, just to
Exactly.
be okay, which is what, quadruple.
Four times. It's quadruple
Yeah.
And
Okay.
what they make now.
that also means that the WNBA would be losing more. They would be in the negative each season, right?
Even more so.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And what you're touching on is exactly the two sides of this is exact argument. One side is payers are clearly not paid enough, but then the other is we want the league to be financially sustainable, right? Like we
Right.
want the WNBA to keep existing. They have to start making money eventually. Some history on that 1983 CBA is that the NBA was literally hemorrhaging money. Like I think only 7 teams were profitable. The league was 30 years old at that point, so it was not a young league. Um, and it had gotten to the point where player salaries actually represented something like I think it was like 73% of total income. And so they actually put the CBA in place to protect the league
Oh, wow.
because salaries were getting so out of hand. If you weren't willing to lose a ton of money, you had no chance of winning. But then if the only way you win is to like not have a sustainable business model, then of course the league is not going to succeed. And so it was coming from like sort of the exact opposite place that we're coming from with the WNBA right now. So the first, what I'm calling myth of this entire discussion that I want to talk about is that WNBA players want to make the same amount of money as NBA players. And from every player interview I have seen everywhere, that is not what they're asking for. What they're asking for is a revenue based salary system similar to the NBA's, meaning their salaries go up and down with league revenue, which means that, obviously it's looking so positive and like we want the WNBA's revenue to keep growing like it is. In that situation, the players' salaries would automatically go up. But on the flip side, say the WNBA starts tanking next year, the players are assuming a lot of risk. They're agreeing to take a much lower salary in that situation. Um, and what's I'm just thinking as a business owner, right? Like you want players are not employees, but if you think of them that way, you want your employees bought into your success, right? And like I can't think of a way of getting players more bought into the WNBA success than if you make their salaries contingent on its success instead of like constantly using profitability as like a reason to pay them literal pennies compared to other athletes. And so the two things that are worth calling out here. So since 2019, which was the year that this CBA was negotiated, it went into effect in 2020, league revenue has doubled. So it went from 100 million a year to around 200 million a year. And that's like in spite of the huge COVID downturn where in the 2020 seasons they made such little money because obviously like people weren't allowed to watch games. This is also huge. There's a new media rights deal with Disney that is going it's total value is like 2.2 billion over 11 years, which means starting in 2026, the media rights revenue is going to increase from about 60 million a year, what it is now, to 200 million a year. So they're projecting another massive revenue jump next year. And this is why this negotiation right now is so important. The Players Association actually opted to cancel the current CBA and start another negotiation. They could have the CBA didn't have to expire right now. Each side got to pick whether it should, and the Players Association said they wanted to renegotiate.
So this is kind of like a little side point, but this new media rights deal also means that the league will be easier to watch, which means it'll bring in more viewers and ultimately more revenue and hopefully profit. Because, Cheyenne and I ran into a difficult situation a couple of games ago where we had such a hard time streaming the game without
Mm-hmm.
signing up for a new service. So if it's streamed through Disney and ESPN, it
Yeah.
should bring in more viewers as well.
Totally. You could totally see this having like a snowball effect on league viewership, which is awesome. The second myth that, I mean, I already touched on a little bit that I think is worth calling out though is because the league doesn't turn a profit, it isn't reasonable to pay players more. This is something I see thrown around constantly on social media, and it just doesn't make sense to me. If we're comparing the WNBA to the NBA, the NBA salary scheme has never been contingent on the league being profitable. And the league went through a very long period where it was not profitable. As we just talked about, it was something like it ended up taking almost 35 years for the league to be profitable. Um, but I also totally get like we don't have to copy everything the NBA does, right? We should be thinking about this like what's best for the WNBA. But even from that standpoint, like today it is very standard practice for companies to operate at a loss for quite a while. I work in tech, so I know it's best. I know that sector best, but in general, companies prioritize growth over profitability in the beginning to set themselves up for longer term success. And I think like a great example of this is Uber. Uber was not profitable until 2023, which was 14 years after it was founded. And like Uber is a hugely successful company, right? And during that whole time, everyone knew Uber was going to be successful. No one was saying, oh, well, it's not profitable, so it's a poorly run business. Um, During that period of loss, Uber was incredibly competitive with their employee salaries. They were some of the highest salaries in tech at the time. And additionally, they issued stock to every employee along the way. So when they did become profitable in IPO, the employees then like retroactively see the benefit from that, even if they left Uber before they became profitable. And I didn't pick like a special weird case. This is how every tech company operates. I think the general idea is you want all of your employees along the way to be really invested in your company's success. And so you offer them like a very explicit reward for being a part of that. Um, and then sort of the third point here is if we're thinking about like risk reduction, if the league's performance tanks, to me, it seems way better for salaries to auto adjust downwards if we're just talking about like best case for the worst case scenario, I guess, right? Like it seems like the league should want salaries to auto adjust downwards. But for some reason, this is like a hugely contentious point. But to me, it seems like if players are willing to assume that risk, like that shows that players are really bought into the success of this league. And so the league should be leaning into that.
I would love for people to chime in too, but I would assume that the reason to not switch to this model for the WNBA is probably just greed and some other things that I could probably list, right?
Yeah, I understand you want to be more conservative, and the WNBA was in a really rough position in 1983. And so I'm not advocating for us copying exactly what the NBA did in 1983, but there has to be something between we have players that are literally classified as low income and the league is going under because of sheer player salary. There has to be a middle ground between those two. Even though the league is not profitable, owners are seeing a huge return on their investment. Um, we just saw the Connecticut Sun get bought, and I think the figure that people were estimating was something like $350 million. And I'm pretty sure I will fact check this, but I am pretty sure that the Mohegan Tribe bought the Connecticut Sun for something like $10 million, right? So they're seeing like a 30x improvement on their investment. The Valkyries, what the owner paid to bring the Valkyries into the league, they paid $50 million, and the franchise is now valued at $450 million. Like that's insane. That was 2 years two period of time. Um, and so owners are making money off of this, right? Even though like the league as a whole is not profitable, that doesn't stop owners from getting money here. It's just players.
If
Totally.
the Connecticut Sun are worth $350 million, they suck. And those owners do not care about that team. So,
Right. Totally. They get so much criticism for it.
because they don't. Because, girl,
Yeah.
I care about the Connecticut Sun more than they do. And I don't care about them that much. So that's really staggering.
Right. It's crazy.
350 million, and you haven't thought about that team in 10 years.
Right. Totally. And I did just double check it. They did buy it for $10 million. I wanted to say earlier how similar the two situations that the two leagues are in if you consider the NBA in 1983 with their first ever CBA. The reason the players still were able to negotiate 40% of revenue was because there was a ton of excitement for media rights deals over the next 5 years. Even though none of those deals had actually happened yet, it was just like a general belief with the way that like sports and media were going at the time. So they basically agreed to the 40% in revenue, knowing they were going to continue operating at a loss, but also knowing that that end was near as these like big media deals started coming in, which is so similar to where the WNBA is right now, except they see the deal that they just made, right? Like a $2.2 billion media deal is insane. Um, and then we see like the expansion fees the teams are having to pay as they come in, like are getting bigger and bigger, and that's awesome for the league. And so, like again, I'm probably biased. I love the WNBA. I cannot think of any reason that player salary should not substantially increase during this CBA negotiation cycle. And so the big questions that like everyone is asking right now is one, are the players going to successfully transition to a revenue-based salary scheme? I certainly hope so. I could see this being a huge hangup if the answer is no, especially since they've seen revenue double over the past 5 years, and they're projecting another huge increase. If they are able to transition to revenue based, what will the percentage be? Very curious to see that. I doubt it's going to become the. I doubt it's going to become equal to the NBA, but I would really love if we start to close some of that gap. Um, the other big question, and I didn't touch on this, is a little more nuanced, but what is the category of revenue that counts towards that pot? The WNBA technically does have a revenue sharing option currently if aggressive growth targets are met. We did not meet those growth targets largely due to COVID. And so the players did not get to experience it. But the revenue that goes towards that is a smaller pool than the NBA. The NBA uses what they call basketball related income, which seems to literally be anytime anyone spends $1 on anything involving the NBA. The current WNBA revenue pool there is smaller, but I assume that that will change in this CBA. I don't know if it will become identical to the NBA's, but I hope it will expand. Um, and then finally, this is worst case scenario, but if negotiations continue to not go well, will the 2026 season be delayed? And this is a very real possibility. I think it is not uncommon, especially for free agency to be delayed because while they are negotiating it, nothing can happen. And so we might be looking at a delayed free agency. I'm not sure if the expansion drafts might get impacted by this, but worst case would be the season is actually delayed. So obviously, like no one wants that to happen, and it kind of goes against all of the. It goes. It is bad for the league for it to be delayed, right? They just signed this huge media rights deal, and then to delay the season, sort of like immediately questions the value of that media rights deal if they're not playing the games. So I hope it works out for the players. I hope everyone leaves feeling like they're getting paid what they deserve. I haven't heard a single WNBA player say they want the same CBA as the NBA, and I think there's like so much ground between what they have now and that could be like a really positive step forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully everybody can get paid fairly, at least better than they are now. I think there's a lot, but like you touched on before, besides pay, you at least need to, if you're not going to pay me well, maybe charter some flights, fix the
Yeah.
schedule, but you can't have a brutal schedule and travel restrictions, and I'm not getting paid well. That's not going to work. And I'm not a WNBA player, but that's just business 101, you know. So
Totally. And especially the travel one. Like, if you consider the WNBA received, I mean, a lot of applause from its fan, but a lot of hate for taking on, it was a $25 million expense when they switched to chartered flights for everybody. But like, that is just the cost of doing business if you are shuttling around 156 famous people as a business model. Like, it is not reasonable to expect these players to fly on commercial airlines. And I don't, I would go as far as to say it is not safe for these teams to be put on commercial airlines.
that was great, Celine. Thank you. I feel informed, and hopefully, if you like, we can touch more on the other elements of the CBA maybe as negotiations get further along. So that was great.